What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another segment of Table Talks, episode 14. This one came today. It came to my mind today, essentially. So random, too, just how it came about. I was listening to this YouTube podcast guy that I listen to often. Excuse me. His name's Podcast Cringe. I keep up with him and a couple others that basically make the same type of content. They critique just, basically everyone and anyone. They mainly critique like Joe Rogan and the establishment and just people who are it doesn't matter who it is. It just matters what was done. These accounts that I follow actually do a perfect job at what the last episode of Table Talks was themed around, the individual versus the institution. And they're very good at pointing out the things certain individuals do. Like I said, not just certain individuals, just mainly like popular people who have a lot of influence, mainly people who typically you know, people who are typically in echo chambers too, which has nothing to do with. I mean, it kind of has something to do with the what this episode is about. And essentially, at the end of the most recent episode, Podcast Cringe had released. It was about Joe Rogan, and basically one of Joe Rogan's friends, Cam Hanes, basically subliminally calling him out for, I guess, just, you know, being and saying certain things in front of one person and then saying other things in front of another person. I highly recommend watching the episode, regardless if you're a Joe Rogan fan or not. I'll put a link in the description of that episode. But basically, at the end of the episode, the guy Podcast Cringe had brought up a snippet of Joe Rogan's latest episode with Cam Hanes, and Joe Rogan basically asking Jamie, his producer, to ask their sponsor Perplexity to look up or answer the question, when did money essentially ruin politics? Hey everyone, before we continue the segment, don't forget to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks for watching, and now on to the program. And the answer that it gave them was a court case, being Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. And first of all, I just want to say I'm really ashamed of myself for just now familiarizing myself with this case, because of everything that I talk about, everything that I stand for. You'd think that I would have been more aware of what this this case and its history and stuff, prior to, this endeavor of me, starting Table Talks and, doing advocations of, certain things, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, in that episode, Podcast Cringe, he did a beautiful job at just, basically summarizing what this case is about. And Joe Rogan essentially, and it was crazy. Joe Rogan, his guest Cam, Jamie, and no one in the comments had corrected their conversation about what this court case is. They were under the impression that the decision of this court case, because it happened under the Obama administration, that it is Obama's fault that this happened. When in reality, essentially so I'm going to read, the Wikipedia top section of what it is. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission 558 U.S. 310 in 2010 is a landmark decision of the United States Supreme Court about campaign finance law, in which the court held that laws restricting the political spending of corporations and unions are inconsistent with the free speech clause of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Citizens United in a 5-4 decision, with Justice Anthony Kennedy writing the majority opinion and all Republican-appointed justices concurring. All Democratic-appointed justices dissented. The Supreme Court's ruling in favor of Citizens United sparked significant controversy, with some viewing it as a defense of American principles of free speech and a safeguard against government overreach, and others criticizing it for reaffirming the longstanding principle of corporate personhood, and for allowing large corporations to wield disproportionate political power by allowing them to spend unlimited amounts of money to support their chosen political candidates, provided the corporations were technically independent of the campaigns. Anthony Kennedy's opinion holds that the prohibition of all independent expenditures by corporations and unions in the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated the First Amendment. The ruling bars restrictions on corporations, unions, and nonprofit organizations' independent expenditures, allowing groups to independently support political candidates with financial resources. In his dissent, Justice John Paul Stevens argued that the court's ruling represented a rejection of common sense of the American people. Reactions to the decision were sharply divided. Typical were those of Senator McConnell, who called the decision an important step in the direction of restoring the First Amendment rights, and then President Barack Obama, who said the decision gives the special interests and their lobbyists even more power in Washington. Okay, that sums it up perfectly, actually. So basically, a little bit more background of this. The filing is essentially rooted in the Citizens United organization wanting the right to air an ad during an ad for their campaign against Hillary Clinton. And which it makes sense because this case revolves heavily around the First Amendment. I do want to bring up the background real quick, because the background regards this Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, and I want to read about that real quick because, it's directly related. So I'm going to read the top of the Wikipedia about it as well. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. Enacted March 27th, 2002, commonly known as McCain-Feingold Act, or BCRA, is a United States federal law that amended the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971, which regulates the financing of political campaigns. Its chief sponsor were Senators John McCain and Russ Feingold. The law became effective on November 6, 2002, and the new legal limits became effective on January 1st, 2003. Okay, another thing that we're going to need to bring up real quick is the Federal Election Campaign Act. So let's pull that up real quick, and we'll read that as well. The FECA is the primary United States federal law regulating political campaign fundraising and spending. The law originally focused on creating limits for campaign spending on communication media, adding additional penalties to the criminal code for election law violations, and imposing disclosure requirements for federal political campaigns. The act was signed into law by President Nixon on February 7th, 1972. 1972, 82, 92, 02, 12, 22, 54 years ago. Let's read a little bit about the background. So, as early as 1905, Theodore Roosevelt argued in favor of campaign finance reform and called for a ban of corporate contributions for political purposes. In response, the United States Congress passed the Tillman Act of 1907, which banned the corporate contributions. Further regulation followed in the Federal Corrupt Practices Act enacted in 1910 and subsequent amendments in 1910 and 1925, the Hatch Act and the Smith-Connolly Act of 1943, and the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. These acts sought to regulate corporate and union spending campaigns for federal office and mandate public disclosures of campaign donors. Okay, deep history here. Since 1905, this has basically been the I don't want to say at the forefront of political discourse and America itself, but it's basically been a like the what I would probably consider the axle or the transmission of the vehicle itself being America. Um, and one thing I was bringing up. I messaged my friends earlier. Monday morning discussion, colon, and I was like, what sort of steps need to be taken in order for there to be, a legal shift regarding Citizens United versus the FEC. Um, and obviously that question, I just wanted to spark a conversation, which I did. And my friend Todd, he's in this group chat. He's starting law school here in the fall. And I obviously expected him to be the first to respond. But he was essentially, he was just, giving his thoughts and whatnot. And, obviously, without it does it goes without being said that it would take some serious heavy legal lifting, serious research, finding the right sort of language, the right sort of situations, the right sort of uh, you know the right moments in time where you can be convincing, you or a group can be convincing to cause a legal shift, because now we're talking about the thread that holds society together, law. For the longest time, from natural law to human rights now, thousands of years of discourse amongst prominent individuals who have given their 2 cents about you know what defines a citizen, what defines sovereignty, who owns the waters of the world, what are the laws that fall within the big bodies of water, what are rights, so on and so forth. And because this is something that falls under the realm of legislation, uh, arguably the hard one of the most intense, the hardest thing anyone can try and do if they obviously don't have the wealth and the power and the influence to just make a few calls and be like, hey, we need this signed in the law now, blah blah blah. But yeah, I mean, since 1905, over a century, almost a century and a quarter now, of people just you know having this conversation about campaign finance reform and you know the morality behind it. And it's blatantly clear, to me at least, that this court case, Citizens United versus the FEC, was was far from anything just and far from anything moral. Um, the first being that the decision ruling being a 5-4 decision, and all five who voted who voted for, Citizens United to come out on top were all conservatives, and the four who voted against were all liberals. The five were Republicans, the four were Democrats, and basically, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But basically, what the other thing I want to explain about this that my friend Todd put beautifully over text was the differences between a regular political action committee and a super political action committee. And you'd think that there would essentially be no difference other than maybe like the size of the PAC, when it comes to giving giving it a term like regular PAC or super PAC. But they both have completely different standards. Regular political action committees, my friend Todd explained. So, like, if I ran for office and if my friend Todd, wanted to support me in regards to being a regular PAC, he would he would be able to make contact with me. He would need to disclose all the donors, and there's just a lot more regulation behind regular political action committees and how much they can partake in the actual campaign itself versus a super PAC. A super PAC is literally nothing but a nonprofit organization that can dump any amount of money it wants to in whatever person or cause that they support. The catch being is that the person running the super PAC cannot make contact at all with the individual they support, and they have the right to conceal where all the money came from regarding how the super PAC financed its campaign to help whatever person or cause they're trying to have win. And it's just disgusting. That's the only word I can really think of, is that this conversation, the fact that we've came to this point, and we've came to this point regarding the how we go about funding elections, and who has the right to do certain things, and who has the right to the fact that and obviously this is obviously going to be something we're going to talk about for forever now in table talks, I assume. This is essentially one starting point to the conversations that will lead into action regarding getting us out of essentially a consumerism society and back into a more civil society. Deep research needs to be done regarding why this turned out to be the way it did. It's not like what was the initial I don't want to ask like what was the initial like moment that sprung this all up. I mean, this obviously has to do with identity politics at its core. This is left versus right per usual. You have Citizens United, let me look them up real quick actually. Citizens United is an American conservative nonprofit organization founded in 1988. In 2010, the organization won blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know. So obviously conservatives. And they're suing the federal government, Obama's federal government. We all know Obama's a Democrat. Because their First Amendment rights were, what's the word I'm looking for? Were violated. Their First Amendment rights were violated. And it's just, it's just slimy, sleazy politics because we've come to the point where certain people are doing the utmost, to try and create change for the sake of, literally, like the difference between what Mitch McConnell said about it versus what Obama said about it. Mitch McConnell said it's an important step in the direction for restoring the First Amendment rights. Um, and obviously, the freedom of speech has been one of the biggest conversations as of recent, because of everything that's been going on in the world. Um, it feels like you can't, post an opposition feeling or opinion about what's going on if you are, located in a certain area of the world. Um, if you say certain things online, they'll get taken down based off of, who runs those outlets. Um, you'll get sued out your behind, basically, what they call court debt, and like Candace Owens, for example, in her situation with the Daily Wire, and how she's talked about how they, since her departure from the Daily Wire, she has been consistently met with subpoena, a subpoena, is it, or like cease and desist letters, legal letters regarding, being sued for saying this, for violating this, blah 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 blah. And it's like, you know at that point, you're just trying to find ways to, one, ruin people, and you're trying to find ways to uh you know create something completely immoral and complex out of something that is, simple and, morally good, for the common good, essentially. um it honestly doesn't surprise me at all that that Theodore Roosevelt argued in favor for campaign finance reforms. Um, and it's just funny that his grandson years later helped, overthrow Iran. 53, 52, All the Shah's Men. If you haven't read it, highly recommend reading it. It should be part of every, like, required reading in every educational system. Obviously, the education system is fucked here. Pardon my language. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's and it gets the case, Citizens United and the FEC. It's just, it gets so slimy because we're now referencing, because I, an individual, can, write on paper that I'm starting this, super PAC, to, essentially help whatever person or cause I want to get, elected in the office. That super PAC now has the right, the freedom of speech. You know, it goes now beyond, the individual no longer has the freedom of speech, for his or hers or theirs uh, individual autonomy. They now have the freedom of speech for, this thing that they just created out, out of thin air, that has, no sort of materialistic form. It's only written on paper, and it's, the main purpose of it is to just, outshine the opponent. Whoever has more money is clearly going to, come out on top, which is absolutely bizarre, because if money really talks to that extent and can sway, voters into voting for specific people or for specific bills, I don't know, how much hope I really have left for humanity when it comes to money and consumerism, or not hope for humanity, but hope for the United States, because it is, it is beyond, you know, I don't even have words for it at this point, but, regardless, like, and obviously it's not like, voters are, making money from the super PACs. It's the fact that the super PAC, shoves money down, shoves money towards campaigning on, on media and, wherever, you can catch the common man's attention. And you can really, persuade people or sway people into, you know, just especially these days, like regardless if you're, Democrat or Republican, left or right, the moment you hear certain language, being used to advocate or to go against whatever it may be, is very capturing to, people who really don't have a moment or may lack the ability to have a moment to stop and think that what they're being fed, should be taken with the biggest, most immense grain of salt ever. It doesn't matter. But anyways, one more thing I want to bring up about this is a book that was recommended regarding this whole situation called Dark Money: The Hidden History of Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right, written by Jane Mayer. It was recommended to me two different times, today actually by one friend in the group chat, and at an earlier point by another friend in the same group chat. And one of those friends had mentioned just a moment ago that if they had to recommend any book to read about politics, and it was only one book, it would be this book, Dark Money. So I am going to get this book, most likely the audio book, because I like listening to audiobooks. Because I definitely want to hear, everything that has to be said about, the billionaires. And, regardless, again, I am not someone who agrees with identity politics in the slightest manner. Whatever, whatever rise of the radical right from billionaires that this book talks about, I'm sure those billionaires are, in bed with whatever Democrats they need to be in bed with to keep, the ball rolling, essentially, to keep the world turning. So I am curious to read, this book, and, just need to bring this up because, the main conversation at this point, the main, thing we all need to be, doing as average citizens, as, common folk, are gathering together, having conversations about important things, making sure that we don't forget certain things that happened in history that really have effect on our everyday lives. I mean, voting in this country does not matter to the single, to the it doesn't matter, okay? That, and it might be, you might think, oh, that's just his opinion. It is an opinion, yeah, but also, we just saw it, with the Thomas Massey, election, and how he lost to that Ed guy, because that Ed guy had money flooding, through the campaign, to boost everything, to boost his image, to boost the amount of content that gets spread regarding him. Not just regarding him, but the content that gets spread around regarding Massey and the things that they were saying about Massey. And just, many other examples too. Obviously, like, it's, and it doesn't help when it comes to, how the conversations are being had regarding elections, regarding election fraud, regarding, regarding someone like the president, talking using very, surface level language that, the election was rigged, the election was taken from me. Both sides, I think, are, guilty of trying to believe, or wanting to believe, that because the opposition had won, that it was a rigged election. And, like I said, I mean, when it comes to donors and stuff, like, you can look up everything regarding the donors of, elections and stuff, and you can see, like, who is giving money to who, when it comes to those who win. You know, why did this person win? Oh, because why did person A win? Because person B, who, you know, comes from this background, gave them the money to win. And it's just insane that, you know, it's like, it's almost a fact that the more money that gets spent on a campaign, uh, the you know, the higher the odds are that you are going to win. Um, let's look. Let me type something into Google real quick and see. Has anyone who has ran in an election? How do I want to word this? I want to ask. I want to see if there has ever been an election where the winner. Okay, yeah. Let me ask it like that. Has there ever been an election where the winner was was not funded as much as the loser? List of United States presidential elections in which the winner lost the... That's not what I'm looking for. Um, let's see. Has there ever been a time in U.S. history when a presidential or congressional candidate didn't need a bunch of money to be elected? I mean, that kind of goes along, but I'm looking for specific examples where there was an election where the winner came out on top with having had less money donated to their campaign than the loser. I'm gonna ask that question in the group chat and see if they know anything. Because it didn't really give me the AI in Google didn't come up with anything. Let me see if it's searching. Yes, there have been many elections where candidates who raised or spent less money defeated a better funded opponent. While data from Open Secrets shows that the top spending candidate wins the vast majority of time, money does not guarantee a victory. Okay. In 2016, Trump, I guess, won despite being heavily outspent by Clinton. In 2020 Senate election in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham won election despite his Democratic challengers shattering fundraising records by pooling over $1,330 million. Okay, so there have been situations. Now, the next step is figuring out those secrets on how those people won those elections with less money. And I'm going to leave it right there, folks. It's been a good conversation. I don't know how long the episode has gone for. I think like maybe 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't know. Last episode I thought I was only doing 20 minutes. It turned out to be like 40 minutes. So, but definitely great conversation. Definitely, you know, something that, like I said, the average American needs to be, you know, talking about with everyone around them. Because you never know where these conversations are going to lead. And with that, stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends and family, connect with me on LinkedIn, and yeah, we'll catch you next time. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. It means a lot. Don't forget again to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next time.